I'm Michael, and welcome to Beyond the Screenplay. Today we are talking about V for Vendetta, the 2006 film written by the Wachowskis, based on the graphic novel by Alan Moore and David Lloyd. I'm joined by the Lessons from Screenplay team, Trisha Arand.
Hello, everybody.
Brian Bittner.
Hello, hello.
And Alex Calleros.
Hi.
So before we dive in, quick context announcement. We are recording this on October 27th of 2020. And if all goes according to plan, this is releasing November 5th. And I probably don't need to say any more than that. Just letting you know that we are in the past from where you are, listener. So that's the context that we are saying all of these things in.
The end.
The end.
Best of luck to you in your world.
Yes. Good luck, future.
Cool. So diving into V for Vendetta, I remember seeing this in theaters and being really hyped and pumped afterward. And as we'll talk about, this is a movie very much of its time. And I remember coming out feeling like a revolutionary. And it's like, oh yeah, we're going to stick it to, the men that are the people that we are upset at. It was still I was still young, so I didn't have a super duper handle on all of the politics of everything.
You didn't know who you were mad at. You were just mad at some people.
I just know I'm mad.
Right. It felt kind of like a sequel in some ways to The Matrix. I think that's how my brain was kind of seeing it also. And there's a lot of stylistic sequences that borrow heavily from The Matrix and that style. It stood in my brain as this kind of weird kind of anomaly of a movie. And thinking about it in some ways, it also feels like Children of Men, the action detective movie version.
Real quick, takes place in the same year as Children of Men. So everyone in 2027, if you're listening to this, don't go to London.
Right.
Right.
But it came out in the same year as Children of Men as well. So
right.
Wow.
Yeah, parallels are there.
Yes. And so definitely reacting to a lot of things that were going on at the time. But I remember loving it and watching it over and over again. And there are some really fun sequences that are forever imprinted on my brain. We were talking about Collateral, and if Collateral is the origin story of a lot of Michaelisms, I feel like V for Vendetta is the origin story of a lot of Alexisms. Because I think, Alex, this movie is right up your alley. So why don't you explain your first encounter with V for Vendetta?
Yeah, is this why you're always walking around with knives?
Always throwing them at people.
Yeah. Just thought it was weird.
Turning on the tracers that all knives have.
Right.
Yeah.
My experience was similar to yours, Michael. I mean, I think I saw it. It was in college at UC Santa Cruz in the Bush era. It was very resonant for me, and I think I also came out of the theater feeling like that was it was a special movie because it was so subversive to be such a mainstream film, big budget, written by the Wachowskis, put out by Warner Brothers, and to have, at the time, I hadn't seen a movie with so many gay characters in it. They're not even main characters, but just the fact that they were all these supporting characters were gay. I was like, what? This can be in a major studio film, and it's about kind of the persecution of LGBT people, and what? They're the minority that's being persecuted. I didn't know you could do that in a big movie. And just the fact that it was really kind of a radical story to be telling. It's from the perspective of a terrorist during the war on terror. I was just kind of blown away that they got away with it, and the fact that it ended up being just a good movie as far as the filmmaking. And yeah, Michael's right on as far as I think the Alexisms that come out of this film are just, there's a feeling of almost ecstatic momentum in the third act of this film where there's a lot of editing going on that is just really beautiful. There's this
the dominoes.
Yeah, just the weaving together of imagery from past, present, future, what's gonna happen, what did happen, with that music, with every, it's giving me that cinemagasm that I'm always after, this movie delivered on that. And so it gave me the kind of the swelling of emotions that I go to movie theaters for. And so that I was just so satisfied walking out because it gave me more than I ever expected. And at the same time was this weirdly subversive Bush era film.
Right. It's the cinemagasm, but like it means something also. Like,
Right.
it's not
It wasn't
just
meaningless. Yeah.
momentum for style. It's also contributing to this really big idea that it's interfacing with. Yeah, it's almost like Montage the movie in a lot of like
Absolutely,
is
yeah.
how it feels, where it's like just it's constantly going and jumping and moving forward, but it's always you're always with it. It doesn't lose you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's a hard balance too.
Well, I also feel like that's something I wish I saw more in film is like you can just cut in other footage than what the characters on screen are saying to each other if you want to communicate something to the audience with that. And if that just feels like film 101, like if you're making a short film or like a, you know, if you're watching like a French New Wave art film or something like that, it's like that's done all the time. And I feel like you so rarely see just something as simple as her going out in the rain and then you know, as Evie going out in the rain and then cutting to V coming out of the fire. It's like, I mean, it's a little on the nose, but like, it's such a simple thing you can do in film that film allows you to do that like a book doesn't, for instance, and that kind of thing. And I just wish like little subtle things like that were done more often.
That's the cinemagasm part. You know, it's like we're using the tools of cinema to juxtapose images and just like give you these like symbolic powerful moments. And yeah, most films aren't taking place in this kind of heightened reality where you can get away with that. And so it's really fun to see a film just embrace the heightened graphic novel kind of reality and just go all the way with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the movie plays almost more like an anthem than it does like a regular sort of story, right? Straightforward story where there's a lot of characters actually, and we're meant to sort of be following them all, but they're all sort of revolving around this theme or this revolution kind of idea. The movie very explicitly tells you it's about an idea, not about people. It's like he's not a man, he's an idea. Hey, remember how he's an idea? You can't kill an idea. And so, but the filmmaking reflects that, right? Where it specifically isn't challenging you to sort of like place yourself as an individual in any one place in the movie. It's sort of allowing you to find yourself in all kinds of places, and sort of, move you through this experience in not necessarily a linear way, which is really cool.
Yeah. What's kind of like impressive about it is that it, like everything you're just saying, but it feels like so like effortless, or that it intended to do that. And I feel like there are very few movies that can pull that off. And so I don't know, it's one of those movies that I watch and I'm like, did you mean to do this well? Because like, I don't know that you can intend to do it and have it work this well, because it is a little bit of that like lightning in a bottle thing where like, so there are many places and many decisions where things could have fallen apart and could have gone wrong. And I think that's what also impresses me about it. It's like, you know, the central character that it's all revolving around, as you're saying, Trisha, is an idea, so we never see his face, and that's a bold decision, and it's not even different faces or some kind of mechanism where he's always in shadow. Like even in these emotional scenes where he's like, you know, experiencing a heartbreak or whatever it is, he has this big goofy smile on his mask face, and like that, I don't know. There's so many risks that were taken in it that I guess I'm kind of echoing what you were saying, Alex, that it's impressive that somehow they got away with it and managed to pull it off and achieve this thing that does feel like it's about the ideas more than the people or even the mechanics of the plot. Like that was a thought I remember having when I saw it originally was I'm not following everything 100%, and I don't super duper get what's happening, but I get what's happening. Like the important stuff I'm with.
You're carried through it despite the fact that a lot of things don't make sense. Because it kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's so highly visual. It's so cinematic that it makes you wonder. I mean, because I don't know if I've gotten to see the script, but it does make you wonder how much of it is on the page. But either way, it's so clearly like the graphic novel quality is being lifted into the film, but also the Wachowskis' directorial eye is definitely being like reflected. You know, James McTeague directed this film and, you know, did a spectacular job, but you really get that cinematic quality from the filmmaking, which I assume was born directly out of the script. And of course, the Wachowskis also produced this. And so I think you see that sort of directorial eye stamped all over this.
Well, and James McTeague probably directed a lot of sequences in the Matrix trilogy. You know,
Exactly.
as their assistant director, there's so many like random action shots in Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions. I'm sure he had his hands on a lot of that.
Oh yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting to see that like he was assistant director on Dark City, then the Matrix trilogy with Hugo Weaving, then episode 2 with Attack of the Clones with Natalie Portman, and then it's like, and then what movie did you make with the Wachowski?
Right.
That would be it.
Exactly.
And yeah, you know, Alex, you were talking about like getting away with this stuff in a sort of Hollywood blockbuster film, and it's interesting because it feels like it's just barely that. It's like, yes, it was released by Warner Brothers, but it's like it was written by Americans, but based on a graphic novel by, you know, Alan Moore, who's English, and then an Australian director, and it takes place in London. So it's sort of like, it's like everything that Hollywood blockbusters aren't. It just happened to actually be distributed and like funded and stuff by a studio, but it sort of felt like that it's like a backdoor blockbuster in a weird sort of way. And then the other thing I wanted to mention real quick about sort of following all the intricacies of the different characters and stuff, I just find that like sports, politics, and war movies, like those 3 topics, I find when I'm watching them sometimes, my eyes start to glaze over and I'm like, I don't remember who's who. Courtroom dramas can happen a little bit, but I think it's helpful when you're just in one room and are sort of like, these people are over here, these people are over here. You can sort of like point to where everyone is.
Right.
But I just find that like those, and it has nothing negative to do with the writing or the directing. It's just, I personally sometimes find that it's hard to focus and like remember and retain all the information and stuff. And I think that like maybe like a Tom Clancy or John Grisham like 90s thriller is kind of what the American version of like a V for Vendetta, where it's like, we're going to deal with these politics, but also like people are going to run around and shoot each other too. So like we're going to pull you back into the action. So I think that I like anytime like V for Vendetta is sort of like a political action movie, which is a weird thing. Like Children of Men is political, but it's not a movie with like politics in it the way that something like V for Vendetta is, you know? So I think it like sort of helps pull me back into the story when I'm like, I don't remember what those 2 characters who I just saw a scene about, what they found, what they discovered, where they're going. But like, it's okay because I don't need to follow every single detail to appreciate the bigger plot.
I would venture to say this movie maybe tries to lose you on purpose, or at the very least, it doesn't concern itself with helping you stay oriented in the plot. It's actually really complex, the story, right? And it jumps all around in time, where any other version of this movie would actually start something in a very similar way to Children of Men, where it would give you the backstory of the dystopian world smack dab up front, where it would say like, you know, there was this virus, it killed this many people, then the government stepped in and they had a cure for it. And that's how the party leaders got elected. And that's how they've kept power all of this time. They would front load that and use it as a frame to help you stay oriented. And this doesn't do that. Like, it does open with this rant by the Prothero character where he's talking about the United States and how, you know, there's that news broadcast and how like pathetic they are and we're not going to help them. That doesn't give you the St. Mary's virus and the like how much time has passed since then and like what's going on in the party and the government. And like, it really doesn't concern itself. And then it gives you that first Big Brother scene where you have that entire like curve.
I absolutely love that set.
It's really cool.
It's so amazing.
Can we appreciate that the Big Brother character is played by Winston Smith from the 1984 movie from 1984? John Hurt, love you. Brilliant casting.
Yeah, John Hurt is wonderful.
Yes,
well, but
great.
it gives you that semicircle table of all of these middle-aged white British men who kind of are half in shadow and look very similar. And we only hear their last names where it's like, here's Finch, here's Creedy, here's Stone, here's Dascombe, here's like, what? Like, how you're supposed to orient yourself to who each one of those guys, like, we don't meet them at their jobs first. We just meet them seated at this table facing forward where they're all basically this, you know, faceless sort of, I was going to say jury, but that's kind of how they feel. I think the movie kind of tries to lose you where the oppressive government, again, it's not supposed to be about the characters. In the same way that V is an idea, the oppressive government is also supposed to be an idea, I think. And so it almost feels intentional to me, that sort of feeling that you get, Bri, and I've had too when I'm watching it, like, wait, how many has he killed now? How many are there? kind of trying to do that mental math.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it reads, just for me personally, as like intentionally trying to like overcomplicate things. I think it is more of like, this movie isn't about tracking these things. You know,
Right.
like this movie is not about, we want you to have the list of like the revenge list and we're going to count it down with you. And like, you know, exactly like, you know, in Kill Bill, like who she has left.
Sure,
Right.
sure.
Like it's not even really about those details. It's about the larger ideas. And so I think like that first scene, you're right. Like I only know from watching it, you know, several times who everybody is in that first scene in the context of what they're saying in that first scene upon already having seen the movie. Like, oh, I know that guy is from their broadcasting, you know, state broadcasting company. I know that guy is the head inspector. When you first watch the film, that scene isn't meant to play as I know who these people are. It's meant to play as like, here is the situation with this government, which is we have this, you know, crazy dictator in the Big Brother screen, and here's all of his kind of like cronies.
Yeah.
I do think that it's kind of like you were saying, Trisha, that it is more, they're not concerned about making sure you're tracking all of it.
Yeah.
Because it is interesting watching it this time, and it's the first time I've probably seen it in 10 years, maybe, and being older and also being familiar with it and being more interested in reading the details of the plot. I was able to track everything much more clearly.
It's all there if you want to track it.
And I realized things that are kind of obvious in retrospect, but that my you know, how 18-year-old brain or however old I wasn't really concerned with about the details of the St. Mary's virus. And I think tracking all the names, because they are unfamiliar names of all these places and the times, and this person changed their name to be this person, so she is also the doctor that changed, and now she was also built the virus.
Happens to be the coroner in this one scene.
Right. And like gave and so I don't think it even put together that the drug they were trying gave V like kind of superhuman powers.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did not understand that at all.
There's a little like side note of like he has like enhanced kinetic abilities or something. Yeah.
Right.
Like,
which I guess explains how he's alive during that final battle scene. Mm-hmm. So there were like all these little details that I feel like should matter. But as we were talking about earlier, just the momentum and the way it keeps pounding home and drawing your attention to the theme and the main ideas, it lets you kind of breeze over what could, in another movie, be really big bumps and like trying to track all the things that are happening.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons that I really love being a part of Beyond the Screenplay is because we get to have a conversation about some of the movies that we really, really enjoy. And while I like talking to these guys about Black Panther and Stranger Things and Collateral and Moonrise Kingdom, I also would love to hear from all of you. It'd be nice to get some other voices in the mix here. So if you've ever wanted to have a conversation with us, or you have thoughts about any of these movies, you can reach out to us on Twitter. We love to hear from you, and we love to interact with listeners and get your opinions. You also can join us over on Patreon, where we're having really cool conversations just on the Patreon page and also on our Discord, diving further into the things that we really love about film. So join the conversation, please. Get some more opinions in here.
Trisha is sick of us.
This is a cry for help.
This is a cry for help.
I know. Do we need to be here for this? Or
I just like hearing what people think. Lots of people. Other people.
We love you too, Trisha.
So see you guys on Twitter.
I think this movie does something really smart in the opening 10 minutes where V saves Evie in the alley, which is when he starts giving his little monologue about how he's a vociferous villain, you know, who, whatever. She does a little like look, like a little like, huh, kind of look when he's doing his thing. And then her line afterwards is, are you like
I love it.
A crazy person?
Right.
And I really think that little tiny moment gives us the ability to take a step back and be like, okay, like this movie knows it's not trying to be like super damn serious, and like the movie doesn't think this hero is like the coolest guy we've ever seen in the world, and like we're supposed to take him extra serious. Even when you get into like the sort of political back and forth and all the goings on between these characters like we're talking about, it's sort of it's all sort of giving you permission to be like, just hang out, Like, we're gonna get there. We're gonna have like people throwing knives at each other's heads and things like that. Like, anytime you feel like you don't have to, a movie's not taking itself as seriously as it could, I think it just lets you relax a little bit and just sort of appreciate it and take it in. And yeah, I don't know.
I mean, especially if you can see that if they were going to take themselves seriously, it would not be working. Like, I think it signals, it
Right.
lets you feel confident that the storytellers know
Right.
the story that they're telling and how they're telling it. It goes back to, like you were saying about, sit back, relax. There are going to be knives and guns later. The thing I was struck by this time is how it does feel like this weird genre mashup. And I think that's partially what felt subversive even to me at the time, just as like a filmmaker, was like not understanding what the movie was, because it felt kind of marketed again like a big action Matrix sequel, and Natalie Portman, and she shaved her hair, everybody, like it's this big event, like you gotta go see it.
When it's kind of like a superhero movie. It's like it's a DC comic or whatever. Yeah, it's like so you think it's a superhero. Yeah.
I don't think I ever thought about it as a superhero movie until afterward, and people were like, "Oh yeah, it's one of the better superhero movies." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess it is, but
not really.
But it's not treated like the way a Superman is."
Right.
And you get a little bit of that like action at the start. You get a little bit of that superhero stuff,
but then it's like a detective thing for most of the movie. Yeah,
right. Yeah, and so it is just interesting how it is constantly kind of shifting gears, but staying within this kind of barely cohesive bubble. And it's really cool. I think that's what makes it feel special and unique, is that it is kind of balancing all these things in a really fun way.
Yeah, I think partially because I would say Evie is the protagonist of this movie. That, like, how many superhero movies are there where the superhero isn't the main character? Like the protagonist who like gets their power or whatever, or like you see them put on their mask and that kind of thing. So I think that's why this doesn't come to mind when you're like, tell me about some superhero movies. You're not like, V for Vendetta, that's one. And I also think the pacing does a lot of work to do kind of what we're talking about here, which is when you are with like two random people, then it's just like they're walking and they're having a conversation. They got to keep going. But then when you do slow down and have like a 3, 4, 5-minute scene, it's with Evie and V or one of the other or something like that. So it's like, well, now I don't want to, I'm always like, when is the moment people will like get up and go refill their drink without pausing the movie because they forget you can pause a movie, and it's like, you don't have those moments here, because it's like when it does slow down, it's important character stuff. And when it's sort of side character exposition-y stuff, it's like, we're going to get in and out of the scene quickly. We're going to, the characters are like literally moving through the space as as they're talking. So it's like, we don't, and I just think that's like, it just feels like a really nicely paced movie for being 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Definitely.
Yeah. Speaking of the protagonist question, it almost felt to me watching it this time more like a TV show and the way it treated its characters, in the sense that it felt like an ensemble cast, because there's times where like I'm really more with the detective story, and Evie's just kind of like hanging out for a year, in certain parts of the movie, like kind of waiting for the revolution to happen. And so it's interesting because it feels almost more like, like something you'd see like on HBO, like as a mini series where you've got multiple story threads with different characters that all are kind of interweaving and then come together at the end, as these very much do, where the inspector does end up with Natalie Portman in the final scene. So I do agree that she's probably, if you have to point to one person who has like the kind of core transformation and takes the final action of the film, it's clearly Natalie Portman's character. Yeah. But I was struck by how kind of in the background she was for long stretches of the film when she's just kind of hanging out.
Like, I feel like when watching it, I'm mostly rooting for Finch, like for the detective, because it's like you want him to put the puzzle pieces together, because you want to know how all the puzzle pieces fit together.
And he's a really likable character. Like, you're really with him and like really like him, because he's trying to do the right thing in this world where that's not rewarded.
Well, and I was thinking too about that opening scene, where they're all around the table, and they do give him a moment to signal to you that he's like your guy, where he's talking about V, and he's like, he's very, very good, basically. And the chancellor, the high chancellor, like smacks him down about that.
Spare us your comments.
Leave your opinions out of this. But you instantly like him. It's like a really just light touch character intro moment where he stands out on that faceless panel of all of these guys that essentially look the same, and they're all lit the same, and they're all very dour and whatever. And then he kind of is like, well, he's very good. And you immediately know that he's your guy. It's just, it is good writing pretty much throughout. I was thinking too, Bri, about the line from Natalie Portman there where she says, oh, are you a crazy person? Like it's pitch perfect. You have to nail it or none of this like holds together. There's nobody to like, you need that POV character. And I think it alternates here between Evie and Finch. And both of those character intros are like dead on perfect, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And that line also, I think, signals that there will be levity in this movie. Also, like there are moments that are funny. And I remember being in the theater and there being certain laugh moments. And I think, the Stephen Fry character and his kind of subversive show that he puts on, making fun of the Chancellor. Like, I feel like there are these moments where you can relax and see that these are people that enjoy being alive, which is, the lesson we go back to is like, see everybody smile at least once, ideally, in a movie. So you're not just depressed the whole time. And yeah, so I feel like there are moments like that let us connect to these people as people. And I think that starts with, for me anyway, with that line with Natalie Portman, where it's like, okay, we're gonna like make some jokes and cracks a little bit throughout this movie. And I think that's what keeps it fun and not just super serious, depressing vision of the future.
Well, and V as a character, like he's vaudevillian. Like he enjoys like literature and quoting Shakespeare, and he's kind of this theatrical guy, which
definitely
is part of his charm and part of the fun is when he's about to assassinate somebody, he's enjoying the wordplay of his like final words to them before giving them poison or whatever.
He's fencing a suit of armor by himself for fun, and then like acting the part where he like grabs the guy's he grabs the armor's like arm and pretends to choke himself with it so he can like shove it off.
Right.
It's like you're doing a play for yourself, for your own amusement.
Right.
Yeah, and I do think like you have the expression on his mask, you have his politeness, you have the whole style of his place, his love of like old timey things, Count of Monte Cristo and the music and everything. And it's like, I mean, he's still a murderer and a kidnapper, but it's kind of this kind of thing of like, if you're going to have a sympathetic lead be those things, then like you kind of need to go out of your way to make him endearing and feel like as non-threatening as possible to the people he doesn't want to be threatening to, basically.
Well, and again, I think it reminds us that like he's a person and that these are people, or at least that's what it does for me, is that it creates, and this is another thing that I've always really liked about the film, is that we have these kind of little vignette, or I don't know what the best word is, but these families and people that we check back in with throughout the film, of like the family watching the TV or the people in the pub watching the TV.
It's really effective. It's so simple and kind of like, it kind of bothered me actually on the first viewing, but you need it. Like it's so effective, and it's such a great payoff at the end of the film when all those places we've been checking in on are empty. Because everybody's finally,
great payoff.
They finally stopped watching the television. They're out in the streets. You know,
it reminds me a lot of the Truman Show, where you have like the different groups of people watching on TV.
Yeah, I mean, it's like kind of like even like the Bill and Ted movies do this or whatever. Like the sort of and I think like Anchorman does it. It's like the guys in the bar and then like the family at home. It's just sort of like checking back in on them and seeing how they react to stuff. And like it's almost like a tropey comedy mechanic, but like it works. Like it just quickly tell me how people feel about what's happening. Like done.
Well, and it shows like that it's what these characters are doing are going to affect these people, and
exactly,
I think, there's a bad way to do it, but I think it works. It lets it not just be about these kind of ideas or about this, his specific action of he's a terrorist, so I get to decide if he's bad or if he's good. It's like there's those moral high concept questions, and then there's also, we're getting to see the people that are affected by the decisions made by those in power. And so I think it invites you to consider many different levels of what's going on, and adds like a complexity to the discourse that the film is having.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and if you're going to have a film that is thematically engaging with questions of power and essentially the relationship of the people in power with those that they govern, right, or rule. If you are talking about that relationship, then you better have some of the average people in your movie. You just have to have them, and a wide cross section is best if you could manage to figure it out. So whether that is in like a, riot scene or just a large scene of large scale protest, which we do have at the end here, but it's smart to have this like, something of a cross section to check in on throughout, because that's where the battleground of the revolution is being fought. It's being fought in between the screen and the people watching it. I've read examples of scripts that are about like kings or queens or like other quote unquote people in power. And it's like we meet like one commoner in the thing. And it's usually like a mom with a baby and they're like, oh, we'll help you or we won't help you. And that's how you know if they're good or bad.
Right.
But like this is a really smart way to go about it because it demonstrates a fundamental understanding of the like sort of core question of the movie. And then again, to have them all leave their comfortable places where we are comfortable seeing them, where they are comfortable sitting, by the end of the movie, seeing them out in the streets and then seeing them unmasked, seeing everybody's faces beneath the masks.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It is just really good. It's a relatively simple device, but used to incredible effect here.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And also seeing people who are dead take off their masks,
I love that.
That always gives me like chills at the end of the film, because the way with the music swelling and like just the rapid cutting of all the different faces coming out and like
the glasses girl.
Yeah.
Oh.
What a smart payoff there too of like to have her be one of the TV viewers and then to have her be one of the like instigations of violence.
Mm-hmm. That was the one thing I was just going to add is that it's not just that we're going back to those people occasionally, but they have an arc, which is kind of what you were saying.
Right.
So like they are contributing to the changing story, and so it's doing multiple things at once, which is why it's extra powerful, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And just having people who are dead on screen, like it's one of the simple things, like I was saying earlier, where you can do filmy things without confusing nobody's like, oh my God, they're all alive. It's like, no, like I also don't think like V set up a bunch of dominoes really. Like it's the movie doing a movie thing, and that's
But then there's
fine.
a literal domino later.
He is theatrical and he does fight suits of armor by himself. So.
I guess my point is I don't care whether the movie is telling me he literally set up a bunch of dominoes or the movie is just doing an artsy thing, because again, I don't think those things have to be separated, just like at the end when we have Stephen Fry taking off his mask and Glasses Girl and the couple Valerie and her partner.
Well, it's prioritizing the image,
right,
rather than like the logical or like the logistical mechanics of it. So I was thinking about the image of the body of V, lying in the train. Yeah, exactly. With all the roses around it. And like, no one wants to see Evie like drag his body over there and go and get the roses and lay them all out perfectly like around his face. Again, we're prioritizing what is the image here that is going to be like poetic and express the thing that we're trying to do. And that is where this movie like just succeeds incredibly. Again, with the symbol, like this movie trades in symbols.
Yeah, everything is iconic in this film. Like,
oh yeah,
that's why it moves me on this like almost more like subconscious level, because I'm not necessarily moved because of the scene where she drags his body and put the roses around it. I'm moved by the image of V being sent off in the train, and who cares how he got there? That's not the point.
It's poetry,
exactly,
rather than prose in a lot of ways.
It's about what it means, not like what happened and how it happened.
Right. But it is also tricky if it's distracting you, if it's Dark Knight Rises and it's like, when did he have time to go paint the bat symbol on a building? He's in a rush, So I think it's sort of like you have to find that line where it's like, like V could have set up those dominoes a week ago or something. You know what I mean? You don't need to be like, well, between 11:30 and midnight, he like went and did this complicated thing. It's like, as long as your sort of poetry doesn't rely on or doesn't interfere with some sort of like logical narrative thing, then I think it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It has to be in step with the sort of filmic world that you're creating. And I think Dark Knight Rises is a great example of, I think some movies want to be able to do that and want to be able to trade and just images and like what it means. But we also have this kind of need to fulfill that logical thing. And so if you set the precedent that everything's going to be logical and make sense, and I feel like the Dark Knight movies are very much like, we are serious and this is a real gritty, like blah, blah, blah. That then when you try to jump and do just symbolic imagery, it has that cognitive dissonance like you're talking about.
Right.
It's almost like Dark Knight Rises wanted to be V for Vendetta as far as like the things it was aiming for are kind of like they belong in like a heightened reality movie. It's like he's now in some foreign country, like in like the coolest looking pit of a prison ever. Like that's just what's happening now. Or yeah, like he came back, but he had time to like burn his symbol onto the bridge. Like that movie was aiming for these things, but then also got so mired in details that like aren't fun. It's like mired in like the convoluted plans of the outside world trying to like sneak in special agents to infiltrate the city that then get killed, and like who was that guy? And none of that matters.
Yeah, Dark Knight Rises is shackled almost by its genre requirements, where it's like we have to be, and of course by its prequels or the movies that came before it, I guess it is the sequel, but it has to check all these boxes of there have to be like Batman has to do this cool thing and this cool thing and this cool thing, and there's a Batmobile, and there's like there has to be
Catwoman,
a nuclear threat and Catwoman and like all of this different stuff. Where V for Vendetta, because it is a thriller, let's go with that, right? Like sort of a catch-all genre word that encompasses most of what V for Vendetta is doing. And it's, again, like engaging with something that is graphic by nature, right? It is visual by nature, graphic by nature. It doesn't really have to do the logical things that The Dark Knight Rises kind of has to do, which is nobody's fault. It just kind of is what it is.
Right. But I also think like the equivalent here is like if when Parliament blows up, we see V's body is like on the steps with roses on him. And we're like, wait, she dragged him a mile? Like that's different than being like she had to move him from the ground to the thing,
It stays within like a range.
Exactly. Yeah.
Non-distracting unbelievability.
Suspension of disbelief,
It's sort of built into the text of the movie also, because a thing that gets said multiple times is, artists use lies to tell the truth. And so part of this, I think is a little bit of a love letter to what art and film and storytelling can do.
Yep.
And so I think that helps put you in that mindset where it's like, this isn't true. Like this isn't trying to be a true story. This is artists using lies to tell the truth. And I think the film really does succeed in that, as we're talking about, where you're not concerned with the logistics of what happened, but you're concerned with what it means. And I think that's one of its triumphs.
Absolutely. And I think in addition to all of the iconography that we've sort of already talked about, the film explicitly does this with narrative, and like even narrative in microcosm. So Count of Monte Cristo is, referenced a couple of times here, where it's a very well-known story, but it's a story. It's a story about Edmond Dantes and like what he does to enact revenge. He's obviously a parallel for V, but also the narrative has tremendous power and has shaped V into who he is. In the same way that the narrative that he finds written on that scrap of paper by Valerie transforms him and eventually transforms Evie. It's a story. She wrote down a story, and that story went on and lived on past her in the same way that all stories are capable of doing. And so again, the movie takes care to hang a lantern on that fact of saying, look, we are telling a story about storytelling in some ways, and how things like revolution need narrative, symbols, slogans. They need images. They need ideas in order to feed them. That is what has lasting power, because you can kill a man, but you can't kill an idea.
Speaking of kind of just like how this film itself functioned as a revolutionary narrative at the time, watching it again, I was just struck by just how much fun it has like satirizing fascism and
Oh,
and like
yeah.
and this just like right wing authoritarianism. Like it has a kind of a delicious satirical quality to it with just the outrageousness of the kind of Rush Limbaugh style, newscaster host, whatever.
Their names are the nose, the eye, the mouth, and the finger. And the police are called the Fingermen.
The Fingermen.
Is that why they're called the Fingermen? I did not pick up on that.
Yeah, the
Okay.
different like ministers of the different departments. That's like so Finch is called the nose. And then
I didn't know this.
Prothero is called the mouth because he's the voice of London. And then
The voice of London, yeah.
I assume it's all straight out of the comic book, but it's goofy. It's goofy.
Yeah.
They're really good satirical characters. Like they embody they embody a critique of this kind of these patterns that show up in authoritarian regimes. The film itself was commenting on politics at the time, still relevant today, and I think it remains a really kind of important satire of fascism and of authoritarian politics.
And I really love the scene where you're talking about sort of like the fun of satire, and the scene where they do make fun of the chancellor, where they're like, we're going to do a comedy sketch to make fun of the chancellor, which is another thing that we know from the history of revolutions, which is that comedy is a powerful tool to skewer people in power, remind us that they are ridiculous. And it helps make us less afraid of dictators and things like that.
That brings up something I wanted to talk about, which is Stephen Fry's character, Dietrich, who I love Stephen Fry and I know a lot about him. And he is gay and was born into a Jewish family. So obviously his character is sort of a reflection of his own experiences. Very different character in the book. So it was actually Stephen Fry who decided he wanted to take this character and kind of shape it to be a little bit more autobiographical, whereas, about the sort of violent, authoritarianism and stuff, and then to have his character be a gay character who can't be honest about that, who feels like he'll be persecuted if he is open, but then can use his platform and comedy, as you were saying, to make a statement and to do these big things that could be more effective on a global scale, just like this movie, just like the concept of V, like things that could be more effective on a global scale than just coming out and saying like, I am this person, or I feel this way, or whatever. And I just think it's really cool that he was able to do that, because that's what he does with his platform that he has in real life, is to use his personality to do these things.
And it ties in again to that theme of artists using lies to tell the truth and all the different forms. And so that it's cool that they also talk about, as we're saying, comedy and art can be many different things, and just the importance of that as a weapon.
And there's a lot that I like about this version of the character of Dietrich. When she's with Dietrich, I feel like is the time that I relax in the movie. I kind of have some problems here with the love story between Evie and V.
Sure.
And what we have is, we know that V is not a good guy. He murders a lot of people in this. But ultimately, he's striking out against oppression and fascism. And the people he murders are like essentially Nazis that were working at concentration camps. And we're kind of like, okay, we're on board with this. I think where it gets really tricky is when it's revealed that he is the one who kidnaps Evie and tortures her and breaks her essentially in order to revolutionize her.
It's also the second time he's kidnapped her in the movie.
Honestly, yeah. So I'm anti-kidnapping, and anti-torture of all people, but especially women at the hands of men, and especially in cases like this, which is to me very Phantom of the Opera, and then becomes a love story. I just think that there is something troubling at the heart of this, where her horror at discovering that it is him is something that the movie moves past, that I'm not so sure that I definitely know I wasn't able to move past the first time I saw it. I'm a little bit able to move past it now because I kind of can see the bigger picture of what the film is doing. But it is a situation in which V is acting like a person and not like an idea. He's taking very specific actions within the context of a relationship that is already established. And I just find it troubling.
Yeah, I mean, when a character does something, that's not the writer saying anything necessarily, but when a character does something and then another character is pretty much cool with it, then that starts to feel like it's the writer being like, this was a perfectly fine thing to do.
Yes. And there's just a very interesting, and of course it is very complex because, what V does to her is what was done to him. It wasn't like torture that he made up or invented out of his head
Sure.
To get the result. It was something that actually watching it this time, I had forgotten that twist because I hadn't seen this movie since it came out. I saw it in theaters and hadn't watched it until yesterday. And so there's plenty of it that I in no way remembered. And so I was like, oh yeah, she gets snatched by the bad guys. They shave her hair off and then they break her spirit. But I'm pretty sure V comes to rescue her. And then it's totally fine at the end. And then as it went along, I was like, hang on, I remember something's up with this and I don't like it.
And then you see the dummy, soldier.
It makes me so angry.
Yeah.
The movie definitely lies to you also. It's clearly Creedy's silhouette from her perspective.
Yeah. When her hair is being shaved, it's like there's a clear latex glove on a hand and it's
not his hand.
It's not a burned hand.
Right.
That's not okay.
Well, yeah, and the movie lies to you in a way that does become logically sort of sticky because when you're being held captive by people, so they're all backlit. Okay.
Right.
So that's how she never sees their faces.
Right.
Sure. The backlight is very strong in this prison. But even so, you would notice that the guard never moved or that there was never another guard at the end of your hallway. You would notice the different profiles and voices of your captors, because especially if that's all the information you have to go on, it logically sort of doesn't hold together that one person could do this. Also, he just has that hallway built into his weird
just in case
tunnel. It strains credulity in a way that draws attention to itself.
Trisha,
and the rest
it's
of the
poetry.
movie does not.
No, I agree.
The first time I saw the film, it definitely broke my brain a little bit because it did seem to cross a line.
It does
beyond the normal boundaries of the poetry of the film. It's this is asking you to believe in a very specific circumstance that is very hard to believe. This is not just poetic imagery. This is she was literally kidnapped and put in a replica of the prison he was imprisoned in, and all these things happen.
Which again, how long were you planning this, dude?
Right. It's very specific. It's not it's not a broad idea.
I do appreciate that Natalie Portman's performance transforms when she transforms. It's a really just the way she holds herself and everything, which, you find sometimes when you're when you shave your head or when you put on a certain outfit or something like that, you're I feel different now. But you see a subtle but noticeable change in just how she carries herself for the last 30 minutes of the movie.
I think the part that I just really can't get on board with, I can kind of buy the rest of it for thematic reasons and just okay, we need to radicalize her as a character so she will throw the switch at the end and blow up the building. I kind of get it, but I don't think it needs to be a love story, and I don't think it should be a love story.
Sure.
I think it undercuts so much of her agency, and gosh, I really hate the way that they put her in a skirt at the end. There's so much that I just and when she kisses the mask, it blurs the lines of, is this about a revolution or is this about a love story? And if it's about a revolution, make it about that and own it. She has every reason to get radicalized that doesn't need to entangle her romantically with V. The government killed her parents. The virus killed her brother. And then she finds this beautiful story by this previous prisoner named Valerie, sort of that teaches her this lesson about not being broken and owning who you are and holding tight to the part, your faith and your hope that that torture can't take away from you. Let it be about that. Why muddy it by making it a love story? And that makes V's actions way more problematic. They're already problematic, but it just makes them 1,000 times worse.
I did think there could be a really interesting version of this film that like still has V do everything that he does, but like you're pointing out,
Yeah.
why does she need to kiss him at the end? Like, why can't it be, you, like, your actions changed me. I can never forgive you for what you did to me, but
Right.
I have changed, and I am, like, I have no fear anymore thanks to you, whether I think it was right that you did it to me or not. And not have it be a love relationship, but a, like, just a more uneasy, ambiguous relationship of, like, we are revolutionary partners by the end, but I will never forgive you for, like, literally putting me through what you were put through by the fascist regime.
What I wouldn't give for that version of this movie.
That'd be a really interesting version. Yeah.
I feel like the movie almost does it. I feel like
Almo-
it is in
yeah.
that last interaction with them, because I feel like even during the dance, she has a little bit of like, I'm,
She makes a comment of, like, I guess you really, like, changed me, because her friend didn't even recognize her or something. She has a
Mhm.
comment that almost sounds kind of bitter, where she's like,
Right.
the old me is gone, entirely because of you.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think it's all believable until like the train and all the things that you're talking about, Trisha, where the kiss, and she's like, "Wait, don't do it. Like we can leave together." And that's when it's like,
right.
no, 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 no. Like her character just changed all of a sudden, so that there can be a like, "Please don't go" scene. Because I feel like that's where it really, really bothered me. I think it is cool and complex. Just her arc and what he
Yeah.
does to her is really fascinating, and it does, it's an example of what we, the opposite of what we were saying earlier, where sometimes the movie can just be about what it means and not about the logistics. And as you guys were talking about, the complexity of the logistics required for him to do all this to her is like the example of what not to do. But I feel like it kind of works because the Valerie montage is so powerful and
Yeah,
the
Mhm.
transformation
so
is so
good.
powerful. And I remember not really liking it, or Evie's transformation not really clicking for me when I first saw it. And I think this time, because I'm older and much more cynical, it really clicked actually. And I think the one, not saving grace, like it's completely bad what he does to her, but I think the one thing that he says that interests me anyway is that, he's saying like, every day it was so hard for me to do this to you, blah blah blah. But then when he says like, but every time you didn't give in, like
Mhm.
it felt like I couldn't stop. And I feel like that's at least speaking to her power and her will. And I think that sequence is about that. And in a very literal way is showing like kind of only when we're pushed to our limits do we realize what we're willing to die for. And for some reason that just like really hit me this time, is like seeing her go all the way there was really powerful. And like I got it.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the film is that you need her to be put in a situation that pushes her to exactly this point for the film to work. And it's just this interesting thing from, I think, the source material, that it's V himself who does it to her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, once again, that's a really interesting choice, very complex, kind of dark choice to make, to have it be at his hands that she is pushed to that brink. Is that ethical or not? Is that right? And I think, yeah, there is a more interesting version of their character arc that keeps it complex to the end and doesn't let it be a simple love story at the end.
Right. And doesn't completely undercut it and rob it at
Yeah,
the end.
one of the
Yeah.
things I love about the end of that sequence, when she does, like, realize that she's like in the Matrix, basically, there's kind of that, like,
Yeah, yeah,
almost
yeah.
Matrix twist of, like, none of that was real.
Mm-hmm.
How she looks like a monk. She's dressed in this, like, very simple, almost like orange,
Mm-hmm.
like,
Sack.
sack. Her head is shaved, and there is that's where I really feel the Wachowskis' presence is, like, they are almost making this commentary of, like, you really can't be free until you've, like, lost everything. You've
Right,
lost,
yeah.
you're stripped down to this almost like monk like
Yeah,
existence.
aesthetic. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then she has a moment in the rain where she kind of just, like, is reborn, essentially. And I think that is very powerful, once again, iconic, almost like mythic imagery in this film of, like, the person reduced to nothing finds their power after they, because they have nothing left to lose, they have nothing left to fear, they're okay with dying, and from that place they can now actually be the revolutionary. So I love all that it does, and I think I agree with you, Trisha, that it's just very weird that it gets so simplified by the end.
And all of this goes into my lesson, which is a resounding yes to everything you just said, Alex. But I want to return to the choice of costume for her a little bit later. And I don't know if this is a screenwriting lesson or if this is just a filmmaking lesson for me, but I really, really disagree with the choice of her costume later in the movie. In the last scene, she's wearing this like sweater. Basically, it's like a cardigan that has a low V in the front and in the back. It's a very cute cardigan. I kind of wish I had it. And then she's wearing a skirt and a pair of flats. And then she has like a military style jacket that goes over it. But it's very similar in a lot of ways to the kind of costuming we see her in at the beginning of the movie. She's like sort of feminine. She's got long curly hair. And when we see her like working at her job at the television station, she in a pair of flats, in a skirt kind of thing. It's so similar to how we see her dressed at the beginning of the movie that it doesn't do a good job of signaling her transformation. The shaved head is awesome. It's a really striking visual look. And of course, it was the one that everybody made a big deal about when Natalie Portman actually let them shave her head on camera. But these small signals, these character signals, mean something. And if you were imprisoned in a cell with an orange sack over you and presumably very little just like clothing to speak of, you know, to protect you against the cold and against the torture, would you ever wear a skirt again? I don't know. I don't think so. And there's just, to me, almost a lack of thoughtfulness. I'm sure that it isn't true. I'm sure it was very deliberately thought through. But I think it undercuts, it goes into this like very feminine sexualization of their relationship that undercuts the revolutionary quality to it. The marvelous thing about V's costume is that it is gender neutral. And we see men and women in the cape and mask dressed at the end. That is a revolutionary symbol. Like all of the other images in this movie, the costume is a symbol. You had a chance to put Natalie Portman's character in something revolutionary and potentially gender neutral, and you didn't do it here. And I get why, because you're making it a love story. But I just...
Is it because they dance, basically? So they can have a dance scene?
I mean, maybe, but it's so impractical for what she's doing. And she like knows that she's going there. It's like the day of the revolution. You don't wear a skirt on the day of the revolution. It just doesn't.
I would.
Hell no,
Brian.
you don't. It just, those details matter. You have to think through everything. And maybe this was perfectly thought through and chosen. And I want to trust that it was. It's not the choice that I would have made. But my lesson here is that, you know, as a filmmaker, every single thing that's on screen on like that your character wears on their body matters. And no one should be more aware of that than V for Vendetta as a film. And I hate that skirt, even though she looks very, very cute in it.
I would certainly worry that the other end of the spectrum would also be scary or dangerous, which is basically turning her from a feminine character into a masculine character. To like
as if the only way to express revolutionary like energy is through like a masculine.
You already cut off her hair, which is already a movie cliche for like something traumatic has happened to a woman. Now she has no hair.
But that's my point. Is that maybe what their intention was to be like we're giving her this transformation, but we still want to call attention to the fact that she's a woman and not be like, look, we like took away her femininity and now she's a revolutionary kind of thing. I think that I agree with you. There's a balance between those two extremes, which is maybe just the gender neutral thing. But I'm wondering if maybe their choice was, if we don't include any femininity in her, then what does that sound like we're saying about like the only way she can be free is to sort of take away all these feminine things about her?
I don't hate the sweater.
There's probably a middle.
Give her pants, for the love of God. Those are gender neutral. She can have them.
Sure.
Regardless of how you read that, I think the point you're making stands. Where what your characters matter. Right, these details matter
definitely,
and especially in a movie that is hanging so much on visuals,
yes,
and all that stuff. Like it matters. So pay attention to that.
Yeah. Agree.
Awesome. Alex, how about you?
We really covered mine right at the opening, but a lot of it is just the lesson it took away as an editor of, not thinking so linearly about how to cut together sequences, because I think some of my favorite scenes in this movie aren't even really scenes. They're just kind of like extended montages. And it kind of reminded me of a lot of the stuff we talked about with the Christopher Nolan crosscut, where you have, this feeling of momentum that is like more than the sum of its parts. Like you may not even follow exactly what's happening in the different threads, but they're all adding up to something bigger. And I think a lot of times when I'm writing or editing a scene in a narrative, the first just place you go to is like, oh, this scene like begins. And so we have to kind of establish like, why are they here in this room? And like, where do they just come from? And there's a whole scene that has to happen here. Then they have to like end the scene and leave. And this movie does not concern itself with that. Like we just drop into things, stay there for a few moments with the detective or whatever, and then get right out. And it's not concerned with like even locating us in time. Like I actually, I feel pretty unmoored as far as like where in the year we are, because there's kind of like a year that this film takes place in, and I have no idea like where we are most of the time. So that's maybe not actually like a good thing, but in general, the film doesn't concern itself with these first thought, writing and editing, just tropes that I think I fall back on where you think like, oh, we have to like establish this thing. We have to, kind of every scene has to be this whole complete bubble. And this film shows that no, scenes can really be just moments that are adding up to this bigger, just kind of train that's leaving the station, and just get on board. And it's okay to also like, in a film like this that's working with iconography, to have a non-linearity in what you're portraying. Like I love that when Finch is kind of giving his speech to his partner about the feeling he has about what's going to happen.
Oh, it's so good.
It just, it you see past, present, and future all together, and it's just so beautifully cut together. There's such confidence in the way it's cut together. So I'm not sure what specific lesson there is there, but good editing. Like, good job.
Well, and I want to. Well, there are two things during that montage. There's like a quick frame, I think, of the future where Natalie Portman is with Finch in a house, and that also has always like freaked me out a little bit because it feels like it's a little bit saying like, and then they end up together and they're like happily ever after.
That's interesting. I never noticed that.
He's probably going to make her a piece of toast with an egg in the middle.
Right.
And say bonjour, mademoiselle.
I would love to know how much of that was intentional from the beginning.
Right.
Because I think part of the magic of this movie and why it seems like a movie you couldn't make this version of it intentionally starting from zero is that I could also see this kind of crazy editing coming from a problem of like the pacing isn't working, or like some things aren't getting across. Right. And sometimes when you're painted into a corner, that's when you throw all the rules out the window. Like, and you
what if we just do
something.
This? Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of the movie feels that way to me, where it was like these things came from necessity, and by doing so they unlocked this kind of magic toolbox that worked really well for this movie. And it kind of goes into my lesson, which I'll kind of just add in really quick, is that I think it works because the theme is being explored in so many different ways all the time. I think that's where, as you were saying, Alex, I don't know when I am in the year. I don't know that I even really realized that a year was supposed to have gone by between the two November 5ths, but like, of course, that's what would have had to happen. And like not clocking all the plot details. I don't think I even really understood that Natalie Portman was supposed to be British when I watched it the first time.
Right.
That's fair.
She doesn't sound that British.
Yeah, right.
God bless her.
So there's lots of things that are confusing, but as we've said multiple times, I think the thematic questions that are being explored are ever present and explored in different ways and on multiple levels at once. So it's not like it's just beating you over the head with the same idea over and over again. It's you're getting to see artists use lies to tell the truth in many different ways. We're looking at old movies, or we're looking at, again, the Stephen Fry character. She says, "Is everything a joke to you?" And he says, "Only the things that matter." Like, that's such a cool. So like, there's lots of examples of all of it, and it's, even if the plot kind of gets lost by the wayside, the dedication to really exploring the important ideas and making them progress in a satisfying way, I think like that's, I don't know. I think that's the thing that works in this movie and makes everything else click and support it. So
yeah.
Anyway, I think it's a cool way to keep the theme ever present and manifest it in lots of different ways.
On that note, like, I was researching kind of the backstory of the script for the film, and the Wachowskis actually wrote the first draft in the 90s before The Matrix.
Interesting.
So and I feel like it feels like a return to the first Matrix for me, as far as it being a script that is just so chock full of ideas. Like, I just feel like
for sure.
they're just, it's just bursting with so much they want to get out and put into one movie, which is how the first Matrix film feels to me as well, where it's just like theme and ideas are so packed into every scene of The Matrix, and this feels like a sister kind of companion piece in a different genre.
I think the montage about Valerie, as we were talking about, is a cool example of like what other movie makes like a short film in the middle of it, like about this other thing,
right?
But it works. It ties into what's the main thing that's happening, but it's letting you explore this theme in a whole other like mini movie, basically. I also think that's really cool.
The music by Dario Marianelli does so much work in this movie. It's such a beautiful soundtrack, especially in that Valerie montage.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, take us home. What's your lesson?
My lesson is to wear a mask.
What a good lesson.
Hashtag 2020.
Okay.
Yep. Disclaimer for this, that like totally agree with everything Trisha said about like when your character does things like kidnapping someone and that is
torturing them.
Yeah, like not cool, and like that's
not
making
good.
a statement, not good. So I just want to make sure that is stated before I get into my lesson, which is that I do really like when creators are ballsy enough to take their characters to the extreme edge of whatever their belief system is.
Yeah.
Basically, just because a character in your movie does something doesn't mean this is a message you were trying to send out. It means that you're using an artistic medium to explore a theme. Taxi Driver, Clockwork Orange, Natural Born Killers, American Psycho, Boondock Saints, Monster, V for Vendetta, Parasite. Like, these are all movies that make bad behavior fun to watch. And in some cases, the creator might agree with the value system of these characters, even if they don't agree with like the extent to which they're taking it. And in a lot of cases, at least half of those movies I mentioned, like, we're not supposed to agree with the characters. They're either being used as satire, or the point is that the theme is embedded in how other characters are reacting to them, things like that.
Right.
Like, and I think that V is an interesting blend of those things. He's actually tame compared to the book, where it's like, to what extent are we supposed to be on his side? We're like, okay, I agree with this thing, but like, and then maybe with this big thing that you do at the end, but not with what you do to Eve, sort of like, but like, my point is I appreciate that they can make his character be complicated. And I also think it's strong to have Evie be the protagonist. And that's why I see her as the protagonist, is because how she processes everything is more in line with how we as the audience might process what V is doing. But then that lets V be more of an extreme character than he could be if we were supposed to, if he was our only main character, if he was the protagonist, we might be questioning everything he does a little bit more than when we're sort of looking through her eyes and being like, okay, how are we, let's check in with Evie and see how she's processing all of this, which is also why I agree it would be nice for her to be more upset about all the kidnapping that happens.
All the kidnapping.
Yeah. So basically, walk the line very carefully, but your character's not you, and don't be afraid to take them in extreme places in order to explore the theme. It doesn't mean we think that you, as the writer, are saying everything my character is doing is something I'm saying is, go try this at home.
Well, and you're really onto something there, Bri, in terms of have an outside angle on what that character is doing. Right. So that's, I feel like, just a really basic lesson where like we have to have somebody to sympathize with that's a little bit less complex in their morality, just because we got to know what to feel when we're watching the movie. If it were the central character, I don't know, something like Natural Born Killers comes to mind. That's like much harder to watch for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
But like, but yeah, it's a little bit more difficult when you don't have an outside angle on the extremity that is being like portrayed. And so I think that's like just a smart screenwriting lesson for sure.
Well, it's interesting too to think about just like what Alan Moore is known for, and you think about the Watchmen
Absolutely.
characters. You know,
Yeah.
you can't really feel good about anybody. They're very uneasy protagonists in his work, where it's like they do have maybe an ideology they take way too far, and they're maybe also doing heroic things, but you never can really feel comfortable with them, or like you're really 100% on their side because their actions aren't in that black and white good guy bad guy territory.
Yeah, and I feel like I would just underscore what you were saying, Trisha, that like I think for it to feel uneasy, for it to feel complex, like you're saying, Brian, for it to be wrestling with a thing, I think you do need some characters that are providing a more familiar point of reference. So that it's not simply...
Otherwise, it can feel like the creator is saying, this is awesome, do this.
Yeah. Right, exactly. The Joker. Why don't we go around and say what we've been watching this week? Brian, do you want to start us off?
Sure. As I mentioned, I know this is coming out later than October. I can't remember what the date is, but as I mentioned on our Patreon episode on The Thing, my girlfriend and I are watching 31 horror movies in October, and two of them that we have loved are Happy Death Day and the sequel Happy Death Day to You, which I think are poorly titled movies, because as soon as I saw those titles, I was just like, I'm never going to watch these. The sequel is Happy Death Day #2 letter U. I was just
I hate it.
Never will watch this.
Stop it.
But then I was looking up like, best movies of the decade and stuff. And I saw it a few times and I thought, okay, let's give it a shot. And they're both so much fun. They're basically Groundhog Day meets Scream, like a Groundhog Day slasher. That's like a time loop slasher with a self-aware kind of comedy vibe, but also has like heart. Like it kind of takes itself seriously enough, but it's basically a movie that you're supposed to watch and have a good time with. Not actually scary. So if you're not into scary movies, you could totally watch this. Basically, Jessica Roth, who is awesome. She plays a snotty sorority girl who gets killed and keeps waking up the same morning. And then has to sort of like solve her own murder, basically. And then every time she tries something differently, she ends up, it still happens. Her performance is awesome because she has this huge character arc, but she also stops at all these like different places along the way. That's like a lot of fun. So she just has a ton of work to do in this movie, and she just nails it. And then we went to the sequel not knowing what it was going to be. And within 20 minutes, we're like, oh, yes, that's brilliant. This is awesome. Like the cool thing is like if you've seen Groundhog Day or, even Edge of Tomorrow, Russian Doll, whatever, you start to go, oh, okay, now we're at this point. So now that this thing has happened, now this thing can happen. And then the movie's like, but what if this thing happened instead? And you're like, oh, crap, I have no idea what's going to happen now. And they keep doing that. And it's just so much fun. So yeah, despite their not perfect titles, Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day to You, really fun time. I recommend.
Awesome. Trisha, what have you been watching?
Well, I was going to recommend the movie On the Rocks, which is Sofia Coppola's new movie, which dropped on Apple TV this week, starring Rashida Jones and Bill Murray. And I watched it, really enjoyed it, have lots of thoughts, but I realized that our listeners, it's not going to help them probably for whatever they're going through when this comes out. So, listen, I love you guys. I'm thinking of you in the future. I'm thinking of all of us a week from now. So what I'm going to recommend instead is something that I've been watching just during this time generally, which is a lovely British show called The Repair Shop. It's on your Netflix. It is, if you like Antiques Roadshow, it's kind of like that, but it's basically just like, a documentary style, kind of like Antiques Roadshow, nonfiction show where people bring in broken objects, usually antiques, and other experts fix them. And it's usually like family heirlooms, something that is very important to this person. It's like it's an old doll, or it's an old music box, or an old watch that was their great grandfather's. And they have different experts in the shop, and they fix them. And it's just
It's
so
very soothing.
lovely and wholesome. And honestly, I can't recommend it more highly. It's just really moving. It's a reminder, it's just this lovely sort of human thing of like, I got this bear when I was 6 years old, and it's a woman who's 97 now. And she's like, and now he doesn't have eyes and he needs his paws replaced. And they do it. And it's just so beautiful. And that's the entire show. So it's on your Netflix. Godspeed to you all this upcoming week. If you need repair shop, it's right there. You can check it out.
Maybe everything will be really wonderful and peaceful.
Right. And then maybe maybe repair shop. In that case, go check out On the Rocks. It's like, it's fine. It's like a great New York little comedy thing. But anyway, Bill Murray is a treasure in it, but also there's repair shop.
As always. Great. Alex, what about you?
I watched The Undoing on HBO, which sounds like the opposite of Repair Shop. As far as like, not feeling great. It's written by David E. Kelley. It's another limited series in the vein of his other miniseries on HBO, Big Little Lies. So once again, tackling the subject, based on a novel, tackling the subject of privileged people caught up in, murder and intrigue and, kind of being exposed for the gross rich people they are. They're always fun to watch these shows because they take place in these, opulent settings, and it's Nicole Kidman, and
sure,
it's just fun to watch. But it's also, you have this weird feeling where it's like this show is like critiquing the grotesque wealth inequality and stuff, but also like really enjoying it, and like everybody's so pretty, and so there's this interesting HBO like niche, these kind of shows. Succession's kind of the same way too. That one's more cruel to its characters than this show is, but there's this almost like the genre on HBO of like the slick critique of the extreme, wealth inequality, but it's about the wealthy people and their problems. So yeah, I'm going to keep watching it because it has a good hook at the end, and it's a murder mystery and stuff. But if that sounds like your cup of tea, if you like Big Little Lies, it's in that same vein. Different director. I'm not as crazy about the direction in it, but same writer, same Nicole Kidman. So it's a good time.
Well, I just realized that our future listeners also have something we don't have, which is The Mandalorian. So you guys are doing fine. There you go. New season of The Mandalorian. You guys are watching that. Great
Galaxy
job.
far, far away.
Yeah. Michael, what are you watching?
I recently rewatched The Departed.
Ooh.
And it was fun. It's kind of funny because it was from this era also, right? Of
Yeah,
like 2004,
definitely.
2005. And like there was this kind of like moment. Our producer just sent me a message immediately saying, "Are you a cop?" I definitely walked around the house for a while saying, "I'm not a co-op, okay?" And just doing this a terrible Boston accent. But it was really fun. I feel like I enjoyed things that I remember enjoying about it, which is just the kind of uber drama opera of, the bad guys amongst the good guys and vice versa. And then there's the part where they call each other on the flip phones. Flip phones are such a big part of that movie.
They really are.
And like texting in the pockets. Youngsters don't know that before when cell phones had buttons, you could text without having to look at the screen. And some people can do that, but like, it's complicated. But
you can feel the buttons.
Right. You could feel the buttons. So you could text someone in your pocket and know what you're saying. Anyway, so like that's a big part of the movie also. Anyway, so it was just really fun to revisit. Alec Baldwin is always really, really funny. And I feel like it might be my favorite Leonardo DiCaprio performance, and maybe even Matt Damon.
It's up there. I'm with you. Yeah.
I love The Departed.
It's really fun, and I feel like it's one of the few times I've watched Leo like recently and haven't been like, oh look, Leo's doing things, but I was like, oh, he's playing. I don't know. No, like I love Leonardo DiCaprio, no disrespect, but I just have that feeling sometimes when it's like, that's Leonardo DiCaprio that just crawled inside of that horse when I'm watching that, or that bear.
It's like Tom Cruise. It's like Tom Cruise is doing a thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
But it also reminded me that I have this weird feeling with every Scorsese movie that I've seen where I watch it, I'm excited to buy it, and then some time passes and I'm like, but do I like that? And then more time passes and I'm like, I think I might like that. And then I revisit it and then it's exactly the way I remember. And I just go on this I do that with Shutter Island. I do that with The Aviator, where I can't figure out like, do I love it or do I not like it? and I just keep watching them in this weird cycle. So,
does The Departed still end with a shot of a rat? Because
it does.
my fan edit of that movie is the
does.
entire movie, but then not that shot.
I like to pretend that it ends on Matt Damon's line where he just goes, okay.
Okay. Right. It's so great.
It's the best.
I'm not a co-op. Cool. Well, this has been our conversation about V for Vendetta. Thank you, as always, to the listeners for listening. Beyond the Screenplay is produced by Vince Major. Our editor is Eric Schneider. I've been joined today by the Lessons from the Screenplay team, Trisha Arand, Brian Bittner, and Alex Calleros. I am Michael Tucker, and you can find all of our Twitter handles in these show notes. Feel free to reach out, say hi, let us know what you think about V for Vendetta. We'd love to hear if you're revisiting it, if you can handle it. It's not an easy watch in 2020. Thank you, as always, to the patrons for supporting this show and making it possible, and we will see you in the next episode.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Godspeed, America.
Amen.